the new circumstances and challenges in conducting plebiscites in the state of Chihuahua. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Arturo Meras. And finally, we will have the Electoral Council of the Electoral Institute of Mexico City, Bernardo Valle Monroy, who will be talking about citizens' participation in context of crisis. Before leaving the floor to them, I would like to give you a summary of the careers of our participants so that after giving you this resumes of them, we can start our panel. We remind you all that this is an event that promotes citizen participation, and therefore we are very interested in participation of attendees to this panel. The idea is that our participants can have a presentation of 12 or 13 or maximum 15 minutes, and at the end of the session we can have a Q&A session uh, for the response of questions raised by the attitudes. Ms. Professor Beatriz Clara Zavala Perez has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in law by the National University of Mexico. She has professional education in constitution, democracy, gender, and multiculturalism, and has specialized education in judicial law. She has worked as director of the Judicial Training Center of the Electoral Court, and she was president, counselor of the City of Mexico Electoral Institute, and then since March of 2013 to November 16, she was the secretary of the study and account of the upper chamber of the tribunals or the court, and she it was integrated as a speaker in the president magistrate at the upper court, and she is electoral counselor of the National Institute, Electoral Institute. So welcome, Professor Beatriz Zavala. Next, we have Ms. Reta Bell Lopez Vences. She is electoral counselor of the Electoral State Institute of Citizen Participation of the state of Oaxaca, where he presides for the second time the Indigenous Regulatory Systems Commission. She has participated in different conferences, fora, workshops, seminaries, and diplomates, both national and internationally wise, in indigenous regulatory systems, political violence, gender, human rights, and electoral political rights. She is secretary of the International Affairs Mexican Association and counselors of electorals in Oaxaca's Observatory for Political Participation in Mexico. Mr. Arturo Meraz Gonzalez is electoral president of the State Electoral Institute of the state of Chihuahua. She received a bachelor's degree from the Mexican Institute of Technology Education from Chihuahua campus, and he started in 1990 in his career as the manager of databases in the Chihuahua Durango Computing Regional Center, and he was director since 1992 to 1999. In 1999 to 1915, he took office as vocal or spokesperson for the Federal Registry of the Board of Elections in the state of Chihuahua. And now he is a council or president of the Electoral Institute of the state of Chihuahua for the period of 2015 to 2022. And at the end, we will have Professor Bernardo Valle Monroy, who will join us later, and he is President Councilor of the Citizens Participation Commission and Training. She has a master's degree in electoral law and a bachelor's degree in law. He is currently electoral counselor of the Mexican City Electoral Institute since 2017. He also has a PhD in constitutional rights and human rights. He was in charge of the Electoral Court as General Secretary in Mexico City, and he also worked as Executive Secretary at other electoral institutes in Mexico City. He has been Director of Follow Up in the then Coordinator Unit and Unit for Support of the Deconcentrated Bodies. He is co author of the work Mexican Electoral Law, Local Vision, Federal District, edited by Marcial Pons in 2011, and also Mexico City and the Electoral Regimen, edited by the Electoral Court of Mexico City in 2018. With further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Beatriz Claudia Zavala Perez, who, as I told you, will give us the presentation on citizen participation in electoral processes with an intersectional perspective. Thank you very much and welcome, Professor Claudia Zavala. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. Good evening, good afternoon, whatever your schedule is, you attending us. It's a great pleasure to be conversing with you in this moment and in this very delicate situation under this pandemic that has affected us worldwide. Thank you very much to the Mexico City's Electoral Institute for the invitation to participate and dialogue with all of you, particularly my Professor-elect Bernardo Valle, electoral counselor, who has generated the efforts and interinstitutional coordination so that we can bring this event into reality. And of course, thank you very much to the rest of the electoral counselors, colleagues on the electoral function and the managerial aspects, Rita in Oaxaca, Arturo in Chihuahua, and in Mexico City. So thank you very much to all of you. I wanted to touch upon this topic mainly because today we are facing an extraordinary situation here. And the pandemic has led us to stop to reflect upon those rights that we had already expanded and where we had already achieved people to participate in democratic processes that today COVID is posing a panorama that we have to be really reflecting upon. Participating in this forum on Modern Direct Democracy 2020 has the challenge of approaching the core theme that is affecting the social formations where the popular sovereignty principle is affected, which means what to do with to prevent COVID not to become the victim of democracy and the electoral processes and citizen participation exercises. In this sense, I would like to start my participation by saying that in order not to get into theoretical debate, representative democracy and direct democracy are two sides of the same coin, and together they cover the issues of power in representative democracy and the public space, and of course, the general interest for all citizens and all peoples. This is very well exemplified in our social and electoral model, since citizens participate both politically as voters and as organizers or observers or surveillance surveillance of the electoral processes, but we also have another part of participation as activists, as collaborators of the issues within our own communities, whom with as critical actors, we can do this in the political class's demands. And we can do this in both types of democracies. When there are electoral processes, we play a significant role. But today, particularly when this direct democracy has been rescued, there are many states where today there are these processes ongoing that are inviting us to participate all. And I believe that this has been a relevant moment because of the fear that we all have in face of COVID. And I will bring this specifically to this situation where in Mexico we will have the largest, the most complex, and the most numerous elections in our history. This seems to be a very easy phrase to repeat over and over, but we're talking here about elections in one of the largest countries of the world, the 13 in position, with a very diverse geography, with a lot of inhabitants. It's within the 10 or 11 most populated countries in the world, within a context where there is, in addition to not much confidence in policy, democracy, and in the electoral authorities, there is also a political polarization, an inequality, an economic crisis that it is even getting worse. The issue of violence in all its expressions, corruption, impunity, and mostly in the setting of a COVID pandemic that has not only produced a lot of infections, but a lot of deaths, and I would like to underscore a lot of fear. In this framework, the only way in which COVID cannot materialize as the greatest threat against the democratic principle and against liberties and freedom and human rights and this democratic principle is that citizens will have to overcome our fears, our uncertainties, and together appropriate of our democracy and our elections. But for this not to sound very romantic, just as a romantic resource, we as society need to have a high civical awareness and consciousness, responsibility awareness, and a democratic culture that will enable us to understand that by stopping electing our governors and representatives and by stopping in participating in public issues, whatever the cause is, even COVID, is in fact a first step towards the loss of our liberties and freedom. So, in consequence, the future of democracy in the times of COVID is significantly on the hands of citizens of Mexico. And that entails an enormous effort of participation by the citizens so that they decidedly participate in the different opportunity spaces that we have to become owners. And I'm referring here in the electoral topic where we have spaces for elections as supervisors and observers, because elections cannot be understood without this army of citizens, but also from an electoral function, but also as public services in the ballot centers that allows us to uh, uh, tally the voting from people. And also the representation of political parties. Without the participation of citizens, democracy is at risk. And that is why we, more than ever, require a national citizens' participation with a perspective of intervention. All the electoral authorities have to bear in mind the different context in which Each one of our country's spaces are presented here. The historical, political, social, economic. Each state, each municipality represents their own history and their own context. So we have to acknowledge the individual singular experiences of peoples and groups and review the differences but also the similarities that are significant of peoples in a specific community for the purpose of overcoming the different discriminations. Here I will particularly refer to those generated by age, gender, and health. And from this analysis, we have to establish the necessary conditions so that all people can enjoy and exercise fully their rights and tackle more soundly this terrible problem of health that has worsened the social structure that has enabled discrimination to become worse. This threat of COVID will not be able to be overcome if we just anchor to the traditional behaviors more oriented to exclusion rather than moving towards the autonomy of people. The intersectional perspective is in itself a source of attitudes, behaviors, and rights that definitely will strengthen emancipation of citizen and the against the arbitrary domination instincts that domain now because of the COVID, but maybe tomorrow may become a reality for any other reason. If we cannot incorporate this intersectional perspective in the public life, if we are not capable of building more inclusive cities and communities, the freedom and elections will be left to the threaten of these elements for the rest of our elections. And I'm going to use two examples. We have to see the discrimination that we see against women. This is a topic that should be of our individual concern for all women and their different groups. It is not the same that we determine inclusive measures for participation of women in a city, of women in the rural areas, of women of indigenous communities, migrant women, and young women. I believe that we are still lacking to see and review and analyze these differences so that we can really assume the measures necessary to integrate them in all aspects of this processes. Another pending issue, and there are two main social groups are involved here, are age groups in the electoral processes. We had advanced and included despite our law allowing the participation of people uh, or that is to say limited the participation of people over 60 years of age in processes before the pandemics. We had opened the possibility for these people to participate in any of these patients as electoral observers or supervisors or trainers, even officers in those ballot units. And with this uh, view of or vision of health protection, we wanted to perceive and conserve this restriction. But I believe that in this topic, we have to reflect upon the autonomy of people for them to decide what is their priorities, because as they participate as an electoral supervisor, for instance, they may have the opportunity to get some economic incentives. And in this economy, there is a worsening of economic income, particularly for this elderly population in these times. But we also have to look and analyze the situation of the youth who have been demonstrated that when they become young people from 18 to 30, this is the age in which we have the least participation in electoral processes and also in direct democracy processes. I think that these are two main problems that we have to review so that we can integrate all the population with their differences in similarities in all public relevant participatory events. And we have to do this not only for the integration as active voters participation, but also in motivating them to participate in any public service activity so that their voices can be represented in the society. We have another topic, which are disabled individuals. COVID today is posing the greatest challenge that we can face. We have people who are hospitalized, and we had already made headway to open the possibility for those people who are hospitalized could really exercise their voting rights. And today we have to revise this aspect because the health authorities are telling us that there are no possibilities that we can place the ballot centers or the ballot units in the hospitals as we did it in the previous election process. But that doesn't mean that we cannot that we can restrict the participation of these people who are being hospitalized or have been restricted in their rights because of this issue. So our view in electoral processes in face of COVID has to be broad and has to open the participation aspects. We cannot depend on fears to establish the possibility of right. We need to find alternatives to facilitate the exercise of rights in the realities that we are experiencing today in our society. I think that I took a little bit more of the time scheduled for me, but thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Claudia Zavala. That is a great perspective. Without further ado, we would like to give now the floor to Rita Bell Lopez, who will present challenges of COVID-19 in the development of direct democracy mechanisms in indigenous communities, the case of Oaxaca, Mexico. Please, you have 15 minutes, Councillor. Thank you very much, dear Carlos Chavez. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be in this panel with friends and colleagues that with whom I coincide in many topics, and I learned a lot from. I would like to thank the organizers, of course, Democracy International, and of course, the Mexican City Electoral Institute for the invitation and for generating these spaces for reflection that are aiming at focusing ourselves in what is really happening in each case and international wide. And this is something of a great experience that I celebrate. I would like to start talking about Oaxaca. Oaxaca is one of the states of Mexico that has 570 municipalities, is the largest in municipalities in our country. And it has the indigenous community. We have 417 municipalities that have their own indigenous regulatory system that I will explain to you what it's all about. And 153 of these municipalities are ruled by electoral parties that we are all acquainted with. From these 417 municipalities that are being acknowledged in our Mexican political constitution, and that acknowledges that indigenous municipalities can decide their internal ways of living and social participation and also economic organization and political organization according to their traditions. This entail, and we have recognized this from our state law, and these have been called the indigenous regulatory systems. Why? Because they are related to institutions, regulations, procedures that have been transmitted generation to generation in peoples and indigenous communities that enabled governance. Oftentimes, what the political parties used to do in the past, considering this traditional procedure of the indigenous communities, what the political party would do is, okay, you choose whoever they won, and I will give them as a registry as an electoral party. And this allowed this for the system not to be lost. And in 1992 in Oaxaca, uh, there was a recognition in the local constitution that this was a way of electing, and there was no need for the political party to officialize this election. And this is part of what the Oaxacan Electoral Institute has to do. We don't intervene. We expect for the elections at the community level, each one is totally different at different times of the year. They have different characteristics. They are voting through community assemblies in most of the cases, at the basketball area, or in the municipality office, and all the citizens gathered will vote, raising their hands or using a blackboard to vote there. They are much more open. One characteristic in the Mexican election voting is that it is a secret, but here in this municipality it is open and everybody can see who is voting and for who. And sometimes we have this ballot boxes. But anyway, we have elections from 100 citizens all the way to 2,000 or 3,000. It's very broad. And if you allow me, I can uh, share the link of these 417 ways of performing elections in the indigenous communities, if you are interested. No. So what is the challenge? Well, precisely that. Much of what is done through community assemblies that might threaten the community. In this case, they take time and they cannot be as quick as other type of elections. And the organization entails the participation of citizens. It's not a process that it occurs only during the election time, but there are times when people want to really become a candidate for election. Well, the citizens have to analyze the candidate to see if they meet the requirements. In Mexico, we know that there are a lot of inequalities, and the pandemics even worsen these inequalities. There are municipalities where there is no good internet, or they don't even have computers in these municipalities, or they are not very skillful in the use of computers. Like young people living in cities, which is the difference. So sometimes the internet access is quite restricted. So there have been some forums with Mexican women in these communities, and they have problems with the internet signal, and they have problems in communicating. So this is one of the main inequalities. And in some of the panel or roundtables that we had in order to discuss this kind of challenges, well, we also discovered that sometimes they don't even have health care provision and medications. And so there are many, many scarcities in these municipalities. So a large preparation is entailed here. These electoral processes have a way of being done, and the community assembly has to authorize or validate any amendment or any change in the process. So any amendment or any process at this point in time will entail that there might be gathering of people during the pandemic, which is difficult. So they are really terrible challenges. But there are other communities, like in the Sierra Juarez of Oaxaca, where there are several municipalities where there has not been any case of COVID, but they have been using very interesting filters. Nobody can leave the community, nor nobody can come into the community. There have been people surveilling the entrance for products that are coming in or coming out of the municipalities. There are commissions at the entry of the uh, communities. There is a sanitization process for the people who are coming in or coming out. And so there has been participation with a high responsibility sense, because people don't want the people to get infected, because it would be quite complex for them. They are very aware of the complexity of becoming infected with COVID-19. So they are really performing a lot of very interesting activities, and all well organized by the citizens of that community. This in June, from these 417 municipalities, and the periodicity of people is different. There are people elected for a year and a half, 1 year, or 3 years. So it's not that there are elections in the 417 municipalities all the time and for the same period of time. In this 2020, only 55 municipalities will have ordinary elections. 49 will change in totality the members of their lobbying unit, and it says six municipalities only some members will be changed. So in these municipalities, organization is a bit different. So those are who are changing the whole lobby um, community or members is going to be quite complex, and we had to ask them whether they really wanted to do it. A part of recognizing the indigenous communities processes is to respect them for their processes, that they do it on their own because they know their people, they know their conditions, where they are, and the needs that they need to be met. So in this case, we just gave them recommendations so that they could continue having communication with the sanitary authorities, that told them how to segment the community so that they could be segmentary elections by age or gender or schedules, and so that they, yes, of course, would have their election processes, but all having the distance measures and sanitary measures. We, of course, we didn't tell them what they had to do, but we rather explained to them that they had to get in contact with the sanitary authorities for them to tell them what were the proper appropriate measures. So from these 55 municipalities, 5 have already had their election process, and there hasn't been any anomaly so far. The elections were approved, and we will be surveilling what will happen in the remaining municipalities that will undergo the election process. I don't think I have much more time, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, Councillor Rita Bel Lopez. This was quite an interesting participation, as you were able to see. Everybody from countries abroad were able to hear that the Mexican electoral system has quite many particularities and complexities. And in particular, at times where we have measures for healthy distance and different types of protection in sanitary measures. So complexity is really exponentially increased. This is a challenge for our authorities to ensure and guarantee democracy, guarantee access to participatory processes on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have to consider protection of life and health of citizens, which is core. So we are really facing a paradoxical event. It's a great challenge, but it's a great pleasure to hear our counselors who very clearly are sharing what the framework is in this sense. Thank you very much. Now we will leave the floor to President Council of the Electoral Institute of Chihuahua, Arturo Meraz Gonzalez, who will be giving us a talk on new circumstances and challenges in conducting plebiscites in the state of Chihuahua. Thank you very much. Councillor, you have the floor. Thank you, Carlos. Good afternoon, good evening for all of you, wherever you are following this streamline. I would like the organizers for invite me to participate in them, and of course the Democracy International, the Mexican City Electoral uh, Institute, and my friend Carlos Gonzalez, who invited me to come here. And of course, I greet very respectful the panelist members with whom I am sharing this panel today. I am going to talk about the experience that we have experienced in the state of Chihuahua in direct democracy by developing a plebiscite citizen participation process. I will give you some history and some of the challenges for future exercises that we have received from this pandemic. I will talk about the regulatory aspects. Chihuahua was one of the latest states in Mexico with a citizen participatory law, but as Councillor Zavala was saying, the citizens really appropriate it very quickly. And the state of Chihuahua defines citizens' participation as a fundamental right that gives a different direction to the possibility of Mexican citizens to participate. And all the public services that are necessary for their benefit. In 1988, there was this law of citizens' participation. A few months later, the institute that I'm presiding issues a guideline for citizen participation before the vision of the citizens to exercise the citizen participatory law that was recently enacted. In 2018, the executive of the state issued a regulation or guideline for the implementation of this law. So in the course of 1 year, we had a law enacted, regulation and rules, uh, and the first plebiscite in the state of Chihuahua was established. And I will try to describe you the route that we followed in this exercise. The 18th article of the law states that plebiscites can be requested by the citizens, among others, and there are some terms. The Article 40 says that the plebiscite is an instrument of citizen participation of a political nature through which the acts and administrative material decisions are subjected to the public's um, analysis. In Chihuahua, this is binding in terms of a participatory exercise, provided that more than 10% of the registered citizens in the electoral roster vote. In this sense, the guidelines by the Electoral Institute includes the most basic stages that we have in election exercises from our constitution, which is the preparation that starts with the request by people to the Electoral Institute. If this is approved, we start to recover the support of citizens to verify that percentage of the citizens, in this case 0.5%, and pay attention to this figure because this is very, very small. So it is accessible for people to really act and exercise their voting rights. If we have this support, this means that the Electoral Institute uh, invites to a plebiscite exercise or process. once this is implemented, there is a review of documents by the electoral authority. There's a tally, and it is a validity is declared. And if 10% of the citizens of the roster of voters who participate in this exercise are present, then it is a binding exercise. In this case, the request in Chihuahua was submitted on the 17th of May of 2019. And this was referred to an issue that was called Let's Illuminate or Light Chihuahua, which was for a concession up to 15 years of the lighting services of the municipality. And of course, this wasn't well received because of the economic situations and the exercise. There was a group of citizens in Chihuahua who asked this for this request. Another singular citizen submitted another request on the same topic, and so they were analyzed, and a joint procedure was done. We reviewed the legal requirements, and the board of the Electoral Institute in Chihuahua approved the um, correctness of the procedure, and this was on the 24th of June. So this group had 90 days to recover the support signatures to really support the fact that the citizens of Chihuahua wanted the verification of analysis of this municipality agreement to see whether this could be taken for the next 15 years. We collected the signatures through the electoral mobile application from Mexico Electoral Institute, where there is a signature via the screen. The information is sent through internet, and on a daily basis, we are summing up the signatures. In this 90-day period, we had 3,700 signatures that represented 0.54 percent of the voters roster. Remember that we were considering we to require only 0.5%. So yes, we were complying with this citizen support number. We submitted the invitation, and we had the plebiscite process on the 24th of November. So in this period of time of 5 months, we had a plebiscite exercise with binding effects, provided we reached the 10%. So what were the novelties in this exercise? We had an innovative voting model, and we decided to use electronic ballot boxes. The Electoral Institute of Chihuahua has has had the experience of 10 to 15 years for doing this popular consultation experiences and many other electoral practices. And we wanted to do this digitally because we are optimizing up to 50% the election process instead of a written voting. The investment of resources, we can use this electronic ballot box for many, many years. If you give maintenance to it, it can last for a long time. It's environmentally friendly. It guarantees the secret and personal voting process. So this is very simple. It's a digital screen. The electoral card of the voter is identified to demonstrate that it is a proper one. And um, this is resorted and kept in the memory of the application. We have to remember that in Mexico, we have a long tradition of mistrust towards the electoral processes. And so despite rapid voting, simple voting, and reliable one, and we can have the same the result in the same electoral process day, there's always some mistrust because of a hacking or an irregular manipulation. And so what did we do to really protect this. There were academic authorities that formed a committee that really monitored and surveilled before, during, and after the election in the presence of authorities and the people involved. So our voting election tables, of course, we don't have to use a lot of ballot boxes, or we had 188 mm, units with two ballot boxes, and so we were attending 5,000 citizens for each election center. As Ms. Rita Bell said, in Chihuahua, because of the diversity, we have rural populations that are very distant, so there were voting tables that could have 100 voters all the way to 5,000 voters. But we were able to uh, have 376 tables that were attended by 900 servants. And what Claudia Zavala said, in constitutional elections, youth participate very poorly, and we were promoting university students to participate in this exercise and participate. And from this, 94% of the officers were young people, and a large percent were women. So we are really having inclusion of women. So in summary, we are concluding that unfortunately only 8.94% participated, but we didn't reach 10%, but this 8.94% is quite good because we were able to meet something in our first resource with limited and restricted resources, and before a technology that may not be known by all of the people. We had a pretty good citizens participation in contrast to other type of exercises in Mexico. Despite this result not being binding for the authority because we didn't meet the 10% of the citizens going to vote, I could say that the response to the yes to the question was 92%, and the no was 52%. So what happened? The authority involved, despite not having the obligation of accepting the result because it was not binding by law, uh, removed the project of lighting because of this 52% no, and uh, this allowing the majority of the citizens who expressed their vote in this exercise really uh, won because this project wasn't approved. And of course, the challenge that we see for the next exercises. First, the recovery of citizen support entails a face-to-face contact and also better communication, and this entails some risk, the use of technology. So we need to innovate and recreate things in how where things are done, and maybe an exercise of signatures, distant signatures. There are many technology restrictions in our state and in our country, but we need to start using the ones that we have available to ensure that those who really want to participate can do so. The ballot box model for elections was quite successful, but it also entails that those people who come to vote physically with regards to the digital voting has to be analyzed because of the pandemic. And so the electronic voting is something that is becoming much stronger. And I think that in Mexico, this is something analyzed because this is a way of ensuring the health of people voting through a digital means, provided that the certainty that there's a single vote per citizen, that that citizen has the right to vote according to law, and that they are voting for the person that he is corresponding to vote, or they can have this trust. Now, the distribution of the voting centers entails mobilization, and they are telling us stay at home, don't leave home. And so, mobility or mobilization of this election tables entail mobilizing people to different aids. And so, we need a high citizen awareness level so that we can still care for our health and the others, but that we should not stop from going to vote. So the people in the voting tables have to be very aware of the sanitary conditions that we need, the thermometers, the antibacterial gel, and everything that is required for protection. And the most important here, the right for social participation in direct democracy in Mexico, it's expanding in Mexico. So it is mandatory for the authorities to apply the regulations for elections. And in a scenario that is so complicated, such as the pandemic, we have to recreate the ways in which to perform, then innovate procedures to increase the trust of the citizens. And though this right is constitutional, there have to be analyzed. So there might be some coalition for the citizens. It is a great responsibility for citizens as well to exercise our rights, because it is for all of us for that these mechanisms are being created. Without their participation is totally meaningless. So we have to open our minds, open our behaviors, and recreate ways in which we can really enable the citizens' participation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Counselor. Very interesting your participation. We are a little bit behind in terms of our agenda. So before leaving the floor to our Counselor Bernardo Valle, who is already joining us in this session, I would like to briefly mention for the benefit of our international audience, that this panel is enriched by different cases. For instance, Councilor Rita Bell presented the case of Oaxaca, which is a state in the southern areas of our country. The other case by Councilor Arturo Meraz, which is a state in the border of the United States at the north of our country, with very particular characteristics from a geographical standpoint, social standpoint, economic standpoint, that really makes a weave of all this complex scenario for the fostering, promotion, and execution of electoral processes and citizens' participation. So I believe that this is something that we have to recognize, the diversity of the people in this panel. Claudia Zavala is a member of the national body that organizes and works around the elections in our country. And so most probably she has a very clear idea on the enormous complexity of these electoral processes in our country. And in the case of our counselor, Bernardo Valles, who has presided the Mexican City Electoral Institute for some years now, has a really great challenge here, because the city of Mexico is one of the largest city in the world and one of the most populated ones. So the complexity is totally different. But without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Councilor Bernardo Valle Monroy, who will talk about citizen participation in context of crisis. Thank you very
Muchas
much,
gracias,
Councilor. It's a
Carlos.
pleasure to have you here among us.
Buena tarde a todas y
Good
todos. En
afternoon,
primer
ladies
lugar,
and
quiero
gentlemen. First
agradecer
of
la
all, I
invitación
would like to
que me
thank the
hizo Rudo Karman
invitation
y Joe Matthews,
by Rudo
ambos
Karma and John
copresidentes del Foro
Matters
Global
and
de
the
Democracia Directa
co-presidents of the
Moderna.
Direct
También saludar a
Modern
Caroline
Democracy.
Vermeulen y a Andrés
And
Müller,
also, I would
también
like to
integrantes del
greet
Foro Global. Y
Caroline
también saludo a
and
todas y
the other
todos
members
quienes
of
nos
the
acompañan
International
desde
Forum.
Suiza
And
y
I would
otras
like to
partes del
greet
mundo.
all
y por
people joining
supuesto
us from Sweden
saludar
and
a quienes siguen esta
elsewhere in
transmisión
the
y
globe.
con quienes
Thank you very
comparto
much
este
for those who are
importante
sharing this
panel.
streamline
Pues
and
quiero decir
to the
que el
members of
contexto
this
por el
panel.
cual estamos
The
atravesando
context by
nos ha
which
llevado a
through which we
reflexionar
are
y discutir
participating
e
has made us
intercambiar ideas
reflect,
ante los retos
exchange
que se nos
ideas, and
presentarán a
debate
futuro.
about with regards
Quien
to the
concibe
challenges
la
that we will
modernización
find in the
como un
future.
proceso autónomo de
Those who
innovación
conceive in
debe tener en cuenta
democracy
su
as an
deterioro, cuyo reverso es el
innovation has to
surgimiento de
consider
la
the
sociedad en riesgo.
deterioration
Este
in
concepto
a
acuñado por
society at
varios
risk. This
sociólogos,
concept that
entre
has been
ellos
considered by
Giddens,
many
Luhmann y Beck,
sociologists,
designa una fase de
among
desarrollo de
them
la
Beck,
sociedad moderna
defines a
en la
society
que a
of
través de
modern
la dinámica de
society
cambio, la
where through
proyección de
the
riesgos
dynamics of
políticos,
changes and
ecológicos e
ecological
individuales,
changes and
escapa cada
individual
vez en mayor
changes,
proporción a las
escapes
instituciones
from
de control y
different
protección de las sociedades
aspects of
modernas.
the control
A este
bodies in
respecto es
modern
pertinente diferenciar
societies.
dos
It
fases.
is
Una
pertinent to
primera
differentiate
en la
two
que las
phases. A first
consecuencias y
one,
amenazas se
where the
producen
consequences and threats
sistemáticamente,
are
sin
produced
embargo no son
systematically,
públicamente
but they are
tematizadas
not
y se convierten
publicly
en el núcleo del conflicto
stigmatized, and they
político.
become the
Aquí
nucleus for
en esta
political
parte
conflict.
domina la
In this,
autocomprensión de
there
las
is
sociedades en
domain
el mundo
of
que legitima y
self-comprehension
potencia
and
al mismo
understanding
tiempo
by
la
the
producción de
populations that
peligros
will
dependientes de la decisión
potentiate
y que
the
son
uh,
entendidos como retos
policies
de
and that
riesgo.
are
Una
considered as
situación muy distinta se
other
origina cuando
risky
los peligros de
contexts.
la
Another
sociedad
situation
dominan
happens
los
when the
debates y conflictos
problems of
públicos,
society
políticos y privados,
domain the
como la situación
public,
en la que
private,
estamos
and political
inmersos en
debates,
estos
such as the
momentos
one that
producto
we
de
are
la
facing
pandemia
in
que
Mexico as
azota
a
al mundo
product
entero.
and a result
Se
of the
constata que las instituciones
pandemic
de
that
esta
is
sociedad
affecting the
se
globe.
convierten en
And the
focos de
participation of
proyección y
societies then
legitimación de
become
peligros
a focus
incontrolables
of
sobre la base de unas
danger that
rígidas
are not, may
relaciones de
be
poder.
uncontrollable on the
La
basis
sociedad
of a
moderna se
rigid
contempla y se critica como
holding of the
sociedades de
power.
riesgo.
So modern
Por una
society
parte,
are identified
la
as
sociedad
risk
decide
societies.
y
On the one
actúa
hand,
según el
society
modelo de la vieja
decides and
sociedad
acts
industrial,
according to
pero por otro
the
lado, las
industrial
organizaciones
society
de
that is
interés,
old,
el
but on the
sistema
other
de
hand, the
derecho,
interest
la
society, the
política, conviven con debates
law
y
system
conflictos
and
que
policy
derivan de la
live
dinámica de la
together with
sociedad misma.
conflicts that derive from the
Así
city, the
lo ha
society
señalado en
itself.
amplios y
That is
espléndidos
how
análisis
many
científicos
analysis,
Ulrich Beck.
scientific analysis
En este
by
debate
Goodrich
nos
Beck
encontramos
defined us. And in
inmersos
this
los
debate,
que
we
en
are
gran medida
all
detonarán
immersed.
reflexiones
Those
que
of us
abonen a
who will
encontrar procesos de
detonate
innovación y
reflections to
adaptación
include
para
innovation processes
solucionar
and
y amortiguar
adaptation
la
processes
crisis
so that
que
we can
actualmente estamos
really
atravesando. Pues
solve
el
the problem that
contexto
we
de
are
riesgo sanitario
tackling
producido
now.
por el
The
SARS-CoV-2
sanitary
no
risk
es un tema menor,
produced by
implica
the
implementar
SARS-CoV-2
medidas que
is
nos
not a
han hecho
minor risk.
repensar la forma en
We have had
nos
to
relacionamos de
implement
manera
ways in
cotidiana,
which we
trastocando
relate
sin
to each
lugar a
other on a
duda la
daily
forma
basis, and of
en la
course,
que
it
nos
has
organizamos
impacted the
como
way in which we
sociedad, la
organize
forma en
ourselves
la
as
que se
societies,
establecerán las
the
relaciones
ways in which
gobierno-ciudadanía,
government
la
citizens
impartición de la
relations will take
justicia y que
place,
ésta sea
the
accesible
law
para todas y todos
enforcement,
en
and
contextos
that
extraordinarios.
justice is
La
accessible
democracia y sus
for all
fundamentos
in
que tienen
extraordinary
como base la
circumstances.
participación
Democracy has as
política
a
y la
foundation
participación
the
ciudadana
political
como
and
derechos
citizen
inalienables.
participation as
Es un reto
inalienable
impostergable ante este
rights. This
contexto
is
en
a
donde se
challenge
debe
that we
priorizar
cannot
sin duda
delay,
alguna
and
el
we have
derecho
to
a la salud y la vida.
prioritize the right to health
La
and
búsqueda
life.
de soluciones
The
a los
search
diversos
of
problemas que
solutions to
enfrenten las
different
instituciones
problems that
es una tarea
institutions
cotidiana.
face is
Sin
a daily
embargo, el
activity.
contexto actual
However, the
implica
current
redistribuir los
context
roles que
entails
instituciones y
the
sociedad
redistribution of
ejercen de
roles
manera
that society
específica en
and
su conjunto.
institutions
En
exercise
ese sentido,
together.
las
And
instituciones
in this
encargadas de
sense,
organizar procesos
institutions
electorales
that have
debemos
to
buscar el
organize
anclaje de
electoral
elementos
processes have
constitutivos
to
de las
look for
estructuras
an anchor
democráticas en
in
las
the
sociedades,
democratic
como son el ejercicio de los
structures
derechos
in society,
políticos
such as the
electorales,
exercise of electoral political
independientemente de los
rights,
riesgos presentes y
irrespective
futuros.
of
Esto
the
es así
present
porque
and
la
future risk.
definición de
This
quienes
is
estarán al
so
frente de las
because the definition
instituciones
of those who
son
will be
resultados
presiding
de procesos
institutions are
democráticos
the
que se
result of democratic
materializarán en
processes that
elecciones
will be
periódicas como
materialized in
mecanismo de
periodical
acceso al poder por la vía
elections
pacífica.
as
Son
mechanisms of
los
process
electores
for
mismos
the
quienes se
Pacific
otorgan
right
el
to
poder
vote.
en los
And these,
congresos
the
y al frente de
electors
gobiernos en
are
sus
the ones
distintos
who
niveles y
provide
de eso
this
dependerá
right
hacer frente a la
in the
crisis que se
different
enfrentan en diversos
um,
contextos.
elements
La
and will
década de los
enable us to
ochentas
face the
estuvo
crisis in the
marcada
different
por
elements. The
elecciones en todo el
1980s
mundo que
was marked by
buscaron gobiernos
elections
que se
worldwide
alejaran del
that were
latente
seeking for
conflicto
governments
nuclear en el
to
mundo.
move
El
away from
contexto
the
actual
world
me parece que
conflict.
estará
The
marcado
current
sin duda alguna por electores que buscarán
context will be
autoridades que
marked by
con eficacia
electors that
superen
will
la
look
crisis
for
sanitaria que tenemos
authorities that will
enfrente y que han traído
overcome
como
the
consecuencia
sanitary
en todo el
crisis that we
mundo
are
una
facing
crisis
today and that
económica
have
de grandes
brought
dimensiones.
economic
Ese es
crisis
el reto que se
worldwide
viene
of
para
great
los meses
dimensions. This is the
futuros
challenges
y
that
de ahí
we
la
are
importancia de no
finding for the
cancelar
next
en ningún momento
months and the
el derecho
importance
humano a
of not
elegir la forma de
canceling the
gobierno que
human
mejor le
right of
conviene.
electing the way of
En el
government
caso
that is for
particular
the
de
best of
México,
the
este
benefit.
fenómeno debe
In the
ser
case of
entendido
Mexico,
desde
this
sus
phenomenon has to be
particularidades,
understood from its own
observando los
particularities,
diversos cambios que se han
observing the different changes
propiciado
that
desde el
are
siglo XX y lo que va
propitiated from the
de este siglo.
20th
El
century
Estado con
and
el
the
que contamos
century that we
actualmente
are
no puede ser
experiencing today.
entendido
The
si no
state that we are now
relacionamos los
having
procesos
cannot be
electorales y de transición
understood
de
if we are
poder
not
con
considering
un
the electoral
importante
processes and
movimiento que
power
ha
transition
echado
from
mano de
a movement
instrumentos
that
y
has used
mecanismos de
different
participación
instruments and
ciudadana. En
citizen
términos
participation
generales, podemos
mechanism.
decir que la
In general,
organización
we
de
can
las
say that
elecciones
the
cuenta
election
con un andamiaje
organization
muy
has
robusto
a
para su
very
gestión y
robust
organización, tanto a nivel
framework for
nacional
its
como a nivel
organization
local.
at the
Los
national
procesos de
and local levels.
transformación y consolidación
The
democrática
processes of
siempre pueden
democratic
considerarse
consolidation
inacabados
will
en
always
México desde
can consider
1946,
completed in
hasta
Mexico since
2014.
1946
Se
to
han hecho
2014.
reformas profundas,
There
por lo que el
have been
contexto en el que
profound
estamos debe
reforms,
ser
and
pensado
so
en dos
the
vertientes
process that we are
fundamentales para que la
facing today
ciudadanía
has to
tenga
be
acceso
considered
a
in
los
two
procesos
different
políticos
directives so
y
that
de toma de
citizens may
decisiones.
have
En primer lugar, y
participation
ante la
in
pandemia
election
ocasionada por el
participation. The
SARS-CoV-2,
pandemics by
debemos de repensar la forma en la que la
SARS-CoV-2,
ciudadanía
we have
pueda
to rethink
participar
again
y con
the
ello
ways in
garantizar su
which the
derecho humano
citizens can
fundamental a
participate to
votar y ser
guarantee
votado. Y en
their
segundo lugar,
fundamental right to
ante las
vote and being
discusiones que se han
voted.
suscitado a lo
And
largo del mundo
secondly,
y con el
before
temor
the
de que se
debates
erijan
in
gobiernos
the world
autoritarios
in
producto de la
terms
pandemia
of
debido al
authoritarian
aplazamiento y la cancelación
governments
de
be
procesos
elected because of the
electorales,
pandemics and
vemos
the
como
electoral
camino viable y
processes,
necesario
we
la
see a
participación
necessary
activa de la
pathway
ciudadanía mediante
to
mecanismos
citizens'
alternativos desarrollados
participation
en
through
diversos
alternative
países y de
mechanisms
los
that
cuales
have been
México tiene
developed in
una gama
different
muy
countries and
importante
where
como son los
Mexico
instrumentos de
has arranged
participación
such
ciudadana
as
y de
citizens'
democracia
participation
directa. Este
instruments and
binomio es
direct
fundamental
participation.
para
This
mantener el orden
binomial is essential
constitucional
to
y la
maintain
consolidación
constitutional
democrática de
order
las
and
naciones.
the
Para ello es
democratic
necesario
constitution
que
of
ambos
nations.
elementos
The two
confluyan en
elements
situaciones que
need
no se
to
tenían contempladas y
confluence
que han
in
puesto en
under
riesgo a la
situations
población
that had
mundial.
not been foreseen and
Dadas
that
las
had put
condiciones
the
actuales,
global
muchos países
population
han
at
decidido
threat.
suspender y
Many
posponer
countries
las
have
elecciones que tenían
selected
programadas,
to
como el caso de
suspend
Bolivia
and
referente a su
defer
elección
their
presidencial,
elections,
algunas
such as
primarias de Estados
Bolivia in
Unidos
their
y por
presidential
supuesto las
elections, some
elecciones de Hidalgo y
primaries in
Coahuila
the
en
United
México,
States,
en
and
donde
the
estas dos
elections of
últimas
Coahuila
ya
in
han sido
Mexico and
reanudadas en
Chihuahua
diversas
were
fechas,
uh,
caso
have been
particular para el
renovated
mes
in
de octubre próximo.
the latest
El contexto mundial en ese
dates
sentido debe
for
ser
October of
analizado
this year.
sobre
So the
todo
world
cuando se
context
han
in this context
pospuesto
has to
y o
be analyzed,
suspendido
particularly
74
when
elecciones a lo largo del mundo
74
en lo que
elections
va de
have been
la
postponed
pandemia,
or delayed
según el último
worldwide
informe de IDEA
throughout the course of
Internacional
the
con corte
pandemics and the
al 14 de
national
septiembre.
international way
Como vemos, no
day
solo
for
las elecciones
elections in
constitucionales
November.
para la
So it's
elección de
not the
autoridades de
constitutional
diversos
elections
niveles de
alone
gobierno
for
han
the
sido
election of
pospuestas y o
different
cancelado
authorities in
momentáneamente,
different
sino que
levels have been
instrumentos de
only
democracia
canceled
directa,
or
como
delayed,
es el
but
caso del
direct
plebiscito
democracy, such
constitucional de
as the
Chile, se han
constitutional
visto
plebiscite of
afectados
Chile,
producto de la
have been
pandemia. A
impacted as a
nivel
result of the pandemic.
nacional, es decir, en el caso
Nationwide,
mexicano,
in the
tenemos que además
Mexican
de
situation,
los
in
estados de
addition to
Hidalgo y Coahuila,
the
el
states of
proceso
Hidalgo and Coahuila,
electoral
the electoral
nacional
process
correspondiente al
nationwide
2020 y
that corresponds
2021,
to
donde se
2020 and
realizarán
2021,
elecciones a
where
nivel federal y
federal elections
locales,
hold
podría sufrir
will be
modificaciones
held,
incluso de
and
no
also
mejorar
at
las
the local
condiciones de
level,
emergencia
we
sanitaria en las que
can
nos
have
encontramos. Por
probably
ello,
can
me
delay
parece
it
que
because
debemos
of the
repensar la forma
lack of
en
control on
la
the
que primero
pandemic yet.
garanticemos
So
el
we have to
derecho a la salud y la
rethink
vida como
to
un principio
ensure
fundamental
life and health
a
as
tutelar.
a main principle or
Segundo,
fundamental principle
garanticemos
of
el
people.
derecho
And
fundamental al
second, to
sufragio, ya que está
ensure and
expuesto a situaciones
guarantee
de
the
incertidumbre y
right to
potenciales
elections and
riesgos.
voting,
Y tercero,
because it is
exploremos los mecanismos
faced by
alternativos para el voto
potential
a fin de
risks.
reducir el
And of
peligro
course, we
para
want
la
to
salud de los
reduce the
votantes al tiempo de garantizar la
threat to the health of
representatividad y
people and
legitimidad de los
ensure
procesos.
representative
En
of
medio de la pandemia,
people
los
in these
gobiernos no se han
processes. In the
detenido en
midst of the
demasiadas
pandemic,
reflexiones sobre
governments
los
have
aplazamientos.
defined certain
Incluso vemos con
restrictions in terms of the
preocupación la
delays. We see
posibilidad de que
very
procesos electorales
worrisome
sean
that
cancelados sin mediar
there are
consensos con la
processes, electoral
ciudadanía.
processes that may be
Es
canceled
evidente y natural que las decisiones
and the
políticas se han
citizens
centrado en la
not
emergencia
participate.
sanitaria.
And so
Sin
it
embargo,
is
cuando
evident
vayan
that the
reduciendo los plazos
authorities have focused
constitucionales para
on
reemplazar
the pandemic,
autoridades,
but when
se
we
debe
have to replace
reflexionar en la
authorities,
manera
we
de
have to
transitar a procesos de
reflect upon
restauración
how to
democrática
move
que sin
towards
duda ya no será
democratic
la misma a la
processes that
anterior a la
unquestionably
pandemia.
will not
Se
be the
deben
same as
presentar
before the
programas de
pandemics.
salida que
We will
deberán dar
have to
señales
see
de
and
cómo
find
recuperar las
different programs
libertades y
in order to
garantizar la
recover
representación plena. Para
freedom
ello es
and
necesario echar mano de
guarantee
todas las
the
herramientas
full elections,
tecnológicas
and
que
we have to
tenemos a la
use all
mano.
the
El reto
digital tools that
fundamental
we
en
have
contextos
available.
extraordinarios debe
The
ser
fundamental challenge in
garantizar que la
extraordinary context
participación
is to
ciudadana y
ensure
los
that
derechos
citizen
político-electorales
participation
sean
and
accesibles
electoral
a toda la
political
ciudadanía
rights
sin
may
que
be
medie ningún
accessible
tipo
to
de
people
exclusión,
without
pero
any
garantizando a la par el
restrictions or
derecho a la salud
exclusion,
y la
and
vida como
ensuring
principios fundamentales.
the
Por lo
right to health
tanto,
and life
debemos tomar
as fundamental
como
principles. So
referencia
we have to
que con
take it
base en la
as a
encuesta
reference that
nacional de
based
la
on the
dinámica
national
demográfica
survey of
del
demographic
2018 en México
dynamics of
residen
2018 in Mexico,
15.4 millones de personas de
15.4
60
million
años o
people
más, de
of
los cuales
over 60 years of
1.7
age, of
millones
which
viven solas.
1.7
4 de cada 10 de estas
million live
personas de
alone,
60
and
años o
4 of
más,
every 10
que
of
representa más del
people over 60,
40%,
that
son
represents more than
económicamente activas.
40%, are
Y
economically
para el caso
active.
de México en
And for the
particular,
case of
se
Mexico in
estima que
particular, we are
hay
estimating that there is
1.365.000, con base a estimaciones y
1,365,000
proyecciones
based on
de la propia
estimates of
CONAP. Y no
the
solo eso,
CONAPO,
7 de cada 10 personas de
the
60
National
años o
Population
más
Council,
que viven
and
solas presentan algún tipo de
68% of people
discapacidad o
living alone
limitación.
have a disability or
7.7 millones de
restriction.
personas cuentan con
7.7
una
billion
discapacidad.
people have a
De estos,
disability
más
in
de
Mexico.
500,000 son
More than
habitantes de
500,000 are
la Ciudad de México,
inhabitants
según
of
datos de
Mexico
la
City,
Encuesta
according
Nacional de
to
la
the
Dinámica
National
Demográfica
Survey of
2018.
Demographic
El
Dynamics 2018.
75.5 de los habitantes de 20 años más o más
75.5%
se
of people
encuentra
over
en
20
sobrepeso
years
u
of age
obesidad, de acuerdo
has
con cifras de
overweight
la
or
Encuesta Nacional
obesity
de
according
Salud
to the
y
National
Nutrición
Health
levantada
Survey
en
and Nutrition Health Survey
2018.
in
Por lo que resulta
2018.
necesario y
So it is
urgente
of the
adoptar medidas que
utmost
permitan que sectores
urgency
como lo
to
antes
adopt measures
mencionado
to
no vean
enable
cancelados
sectors
sus derechos a la
not
participación
to
política y
cancel the
ciudadana
rights
que
to
la ley les
political and
otorga.
citizen
Por ello, el
participation
uso de
that
mecanismos
the law
alternativos sería indispensable
gives
para no
them. And
cancelar en
so
la vía de los
we
hechos
need
derechos
alternative
fundamentales
modalities
de
to
las y los
prevent
ciudadanos. La
the loss
integración
of
de la
these
ciudadanía en
rights
los
from the
asuntos de interés
citizens.
público debe ser
Participation of
prioridad para
citizen
todos
in
los que nos
public
encargamos de organizar
um,
elecciones o instrumentos de
interest is
participación
very
ciudadana,
important, and we have
con
to
el
consider
fin,
all
primero, de contribuir
citizen
con un mejor
participatory instrument
funcionamiento de la
to
democracia en tanto
contribute for
sistema
a
político,
better
pues hace
democracy
posible una mayor
exercise and
legitimidad ante
uh,
los ciudadanos. En segundo
improve
lugar,
the
democratizar
legitimacy
la
of
gestión pública y
citizens and
mejorar su
democratize
calidad.
the
Y
public
en tercer
management
lugar,
and improve
reconocer el
its
derecho
quality.
a la participación
Secondly, to
ciudadana en la
recognize
formulación
the
y
right
ejecución de
of
las políticas
citizens to
públicas en
participate in
contextos de
public
crisis.
policies
En
in
este
context
sentido,
of
estos
crisis.
tres
In
elementos
this
son de
sense, these
vital
three elements
importancia,
of
por lo que
vital.
América Latina debe
So
actuar
Latin America
rápidamente.
has
Los
to act
ejercicios de
rapidly.
participación
The
ciudadana en contextos de
citizen
crisis
participation
pueden servir
exercises
sin
in
lugar a duda
context
para
of crisis
fortalecer las
can, of
democracias
course,
ante los
help in
desafíos
the
planteados
strengthening
por la
of
pandemia de la
democracies
COVID-19, vigilando
in
de
face
cerca
of
los
COVID
poderes
threats,
ejecutivos de
and
emergencia,
surveilling
asegurando que
the
las
executive
elecciones postergadas
powers
se realicen y
that will
combatiendo la
emerge, so
desigualdad
that we
social y la
can
pobreza.
combat inequality
América
and
Latina es
poverty
una de las
among people.
regiones del
Latin
mundo más
America is one
afectadas
of the
por la
most
pandemia,
affected
con
regions
algunas
by
de las
the
tasas de mortalidad
pandemics,
más
with the
altas
highest
y con cuarentenas generalizadas
infections
que han
disease, and
contribuido
with
a una de las peores
quarantines
recesiones
that have been
económicas en
generalized that
décadas.
have led to
En
one
toda
of
la
the
región, los
worst
servicios sociales
economic
y de salud se
impacts
han visto
and
afectados
recessions
por la
here.
pandemia.
The health
Millones de
institutions
personas
have
han
been
caído en
affected
la pobreza
by
y han
the
perdido sus
pandemics.
empleos.
Millions of
Es
people have
fundamental que
become
América Latina fortalezca
have
sus
gone under
mecanismos de
the
control
poverty line,
gubernamentales
and
que
so it's
pueden ser
important and
cristalizados con el
imperative that the
referéndum, plebiscito,
institutions
consulta ciudadana,
strengthen
entre otros
their
mecanismos de democracia directa que
frameworks
permitan un
through
mayor
different
control
direct
ciudadano.
participation
Es
mechanisms and
imperativo buscar
plebiscites.
todos los
And it's
medios a nuestro
imperative to
alcance
look
para
for all
garantizar
the
la
means
participación.
in our
Esto cobra
hands to
mayor vigencia
guarantee
ante la posibilidad
participation. And of course, this
recurrente
is
de
much more
suspender
important
momentáneamente
because
derechos
of the
fundamentales
threat of
como la participación
delaying
política. Los
fundamental
retos de la
rights such as
participación
political political
ciudadana tienen que
participation,
ver,
the
además de los
challenges of
diversos
citizen
instrumentos de
participation have
democracia
to
directa y
do in addition to
participativa, con
direct
la construcción de foros de
participation
discusión,
with
reflexión y deliberación
reflection,
públicos que
debate
sometan al
forum
escrutinio
for
público
public
las decisiones de
deliberation
gobierno
so
que
that
impacten de
the
manera
people
directa a
can
los
have
ciudadanos.
an
Ese es uno de los
analysis
retos
of the government
fundamentales para
decisions that have
preservar
a
y
direct
fortalecer
impact on
nuestros
citizens. This is
sistemas
one of the most
democráticos.
important
No
challenges
podemos
in order to
desasociar en esta
strengthen our
coyuntura el
democratic
binomio elecciones,
systems.
participación
We
ciudadana.
cannot
En un
remove
contexto como el que
these
estamos viviendo a nivel mundial,
um,
se hace indispensable el fortalecimiento de
situation
los
of
diversos
election
instrumentos de
and
la
voting
participación
rights,
ciudadana y de
because this is
democracia directa,
imperative
en
in this
particular con el fin de buscar
particular
alternativas que
situation, in
permitan el
order to
ejercicio
look
pleno de
for
nuestros derechos
alternatives that may enable us
político-electorales.
to
El uso de las nuevas
exercise
tecnologías
our
será
electoral
clave
and
para
political
caminar en este
rights.
rumbo.
The new
Muchas
technologies
gracias
will
a
be
todas y
clear
todos.
to really address this path. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Councilor Bernardo Valle. Without uh, further ado, we will open the panel for participation of the audience. Caroline, would you explain to us the procedure, please? I
Yeah,
have
sure.
seen some hands already raised, so please, Caroline.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much to our panelists for this very interesting contributions. We have about 15 minutes left in which we will take questions. You can use the chat to pose your questions, or even better, use the electronic function to raise your hand and then ask your question live. And so I see we have somebody with a raised hand already. Jonathan, please take the floor.
Toma el piso, por favor. Thank you. Good afternoon. Congratulations to all the panelists. My question is for Electoral Councilor Beatriz Zavala. What planning is there available with regards to the pandemic that we are facing now? What are the provisions by the Mexican City Electoral Institute or the National Institute for in case of outbreaks and people cannot go to vote? In Mexico, we don't have the technology resources for online voting. So what are the provisions that you are considering in case of an outbreak? Thank you very much. Please, Councillor, if you may. Thank you very much. We've been organizing many protocols. We had a session this morning very early, and I had to leave for the purpose of coming in to this session, is that we are seeing with the authorities of health these protocols for care of health and protection of health. We are doing this for electoral supervisors, electoral trainers. And so we are also implementing information technology in all the processes, in observer registries, in supervisor registries. So we are really running crossover all these technologies of information and prevent as much as possible physical contact. When there is physical contact, what we are doing is to guarantee the measures and generate conditions for hand washing, antibacterial gel, masks, um, hard masks, the safe distance. All these measures in all processes are being generated across the whole um, process. The condition will be always that the health authorities will make the final decisions. We are using traffic lights for this purpose, and if we are still in the orange light, we will be able to continue. But of course, if there is any different or threat based on the care authorities' decisions, we will make any necessary measures and changes. We suspended the electoral processes of Coahuila and Hidalgo because we act in coordination with local authorities for one reason. There was the need to generate all the mechanisms to guarantee and harmonize the right to health and the right to electoral and political rights, voting, that is to say. And the only one I'd like to say here is, unfortunately, in the state of Hidalgo, a model of candidate registry was devised electronically, and most of the political parties came with their boxes, and that entailed that the staff of the institute had to do a a whole operation to handle those documents with masks, gloves, uh, even sort of like a coat in order to prevent infection risks while the staff was working with these documents. So that I'd like to reiterate that both in representative democracy and direct democracy, we have to invite to each individual's responsibility, but also the collective responsibility. I do not rule out, and I want to emphasize this because our law is not designed for electronic voting. But I believe that if health conditions hinder the election process, I think that the authority may have the faculties or authorities, and this is my personal um, voice speaking here, to instrument the necessary measures so that we can ensure the electronic vote conditions. Right now, we are testing the electronic voting for our people abroad. And this is something that we are thrusting and pushing. But I would not doubt that if our conditions get worsened, we could open the channel to implement this technology for digital voting, even though our federal law, which is different to other legislations, is not contemplating it yet. But we have to see how things move on. But at present, with the modality that we have today, we are generating the health conditions in order to ensure the safety of the electoral process and the people's health, of course. Thank you very much, Councillor Caroline. What's the next question?
Yes, thank you. I believe Tanya will be the next person to ask her question. Please go ahead. You can unmute.
Hola, buenas noches a todos.
Good
Bueno, acá en
evening.
Suiza, buenas noches. Esta
Good
también es
evening,
una
Sweden.
pregunta para la consejera Claudia
Switzerland.
Zavala.
This is question
Mencionó
for
algunas
Claudia Zavala, Councillor
preocupaciones
Claudia
que me
Zavala.
llamaron
You
la
were
atención.
mentioning certain
En
concerns
su
that really
ponencia dice que su
call my
preocupación es que
attention.
los
In your
jóvenes no
presentation said that
participan en en la vida
youth do
política
not
en México.
participate in the
Y
political
solamente para
life in
darle un
Mexico.
comparativo,
And just to give you
en
some
Suiza,
comparison, in
el promedio general de
Switzerland,
participación es del
the average
45%. México
participation
está
of young is
participando hoy día
45%. And today
mucho
in
más. Sabemos
Mexico,
cuáles fueron los resultados en México.
we
Y
know
los
what are
jóvenes en
the
Suiza
participations
participan
of youth
solamente
in
en un
Mexico, but
30%.
this
Acorde a las
that
páginas del
45
INE,
is the participation
dice
of
aquí
Mexicans, young
que
people,
destaca que los
and in
grupos de edad
Switzerland
jóvenes
it's
y jóvenes
35,
adultos entre los
and
19 y 34 años
between 19 and
participaron en
34
un 50%.
years 44
Creo que
years in
México
Mexico
tiene muy buenos
participated almost
resultados
50%. So I think that
comparados
Mexico
con lo que
has
se
very
vive
good
aquí en Suiza,
results compared
entonces
to what
no debería
we
de ser
see
una
in
gran
Switzerland. So
preocupación.
this should not be
Y
such a
la pregunta que
terrible
tengo
concern
es,
for your country. My
hemos estado
question
recibiendo
here
llamadas
is
en
we
el
have been
extranjero, los
receiving
mexicanos en el exterior, aquí en Suiza,
calls
dándonos información del voto
in
electrónico y no
Mexicans
sabemos
who live in
cómo ha
Switzerland
sido esa
with
recabación de
regards
datos
to
porque están llamando a
information
celulares.
on
Entonces tienen todos los datos, lo cual está
electronic
muy bien,
voting.
esa
Of
parte
course,
de
they
la
have the
información,
data,
pero no
we
sabemos
have that
cómo han
information,
llegado
but
los
we
datos
don't know
al INE.
exactly how
A ver si
the
nos puede
data
contar un
have
poquito.
reached the National Electoral Institute. Thank you very much. Can you respond to this question? Yes, of course. The level of participation that I was referring to is 18 to 30 years of age, because from 30 to 34 years of age, there's a difference where we have the highest levels of participation from this young population in this age group and in the next one. So from 18 to 31 years of age, we have a 30% And this corresponds to the international level in terms of the participation of young people. But we consider that there's a need today, in the present time, that young people have to be invited to participate in the spectrum of electoral processes. What is happening with the voting of Mexicans living abroad? Well, through the nominal voters roster, we are generating a specific list and we invite them to participate, and the people will give us their data in two times, either to issue their voting card. That was a complaint, and perhaps that is the data that we have for their voting card. In the past, we didn't issue cards for voting abroad, but now we do have this process, and it's the people, the person that will provide us with the data. And based on this, we generate the communication to report them and inform them about the election model. But because what we have to do is first to complete the list or the roster of voters abroad, and who will select the modality in which they will do it, from mail voting or electronic voting. But it's the same person themselves who are giving us their data, or maybe when they requested for their
Muchas
voting card,
gracias.
they provided us with the data. Thank you very much. Caroline,
Yes,
next question.
yes, thank you. So Nancy would be the next person. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Micrófono.
¿Cómo están ustedes?
Hello, how are you? Greetings from Vancouver, Canada, to all of you. In following with the previous questions by Tanya in Switzerland, in Canada, we do have also other questions. This is regarding transparency. In the case of voting abroad, will there be citizen observers, or what are going to be the transparency strategies in the case of voting abroad? Unfortunately, there are um, certain problems where the voting access was not quite clear. So that is one of our concerns. The other one is whether the addition of the data is facilitated. For instance, I got my voting card and I had to update data, telephone numbers, address, etc. So how are you going to facilitate that process, if it's possible now? Because as far as I remember, in the past, we didn't have that option. Another question is in terms of voting from abroad. And I think that citizen participation seems to me very important. How do you think that those people living abroad, those Mexicans, may develop a kind of institutional citizen representation? Is it through the the IME, with certain forms that not necessarily represent this topic of citizen representation abroad? There have been some recommendations to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But is this a issue in abroad? This citizen participation, is it a responsibility of the government? What are the suggestions? Is it a citizen's responsibility only? And finally, have you contemplated in Mexico uh, a vote beyond just a single day, voting day?
En diferentes etapas, la gente tiene 3, 4 oportunidades, 5 oportunidades.
People may have 4 or 5 opportunities to vote here in Canada, considering the distances and the different conditions from a family perspective or individual perspective. Is there anything of that sort in the Mexican election regimen? Thank you very much. We are very interested to follow everything that you're doing down there. Thank you very much. Greetings. Thank you very much, Nancy. I would like to see, before giving the floor again to observe Councillor Zavala, I would like to know if any of the other panelists could respond to some of the questions raised by Nancy. No? Okay, so let's give the floor then to Councillor Claudia Zavala. Thank you very much. This is very interesting because by many Mexicans residing abroad, this is of the one of the most relevant topics. How ob- electoral observers participate? Well, we have approved this in the General Board, an international observation program and national observation board. In the international observation program, we always say the more eyes we have monitoring us, the better for us. And it's very well structured, this program of international observers. Now, what happens as this is an intermediate election? The number of international observers is reduced. It's going to be quite a novel experience today, simply because of the modality of the voting that we are implemented for people living abroad that hadn't been used in the National Electoral Institute before. We had used it in Mexico City before. This is a modality that has been tested for residents abroad. But in the National Electoral Institute, this is the first time. And any changes in address, you can access our website. And I think that we have to reinforce communication with our Mexican citizens residing abroad so that they understand how we are going to operate and what are the alternatives. We have worked hand to hand with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because as an authority, as a state, we are seeing ourselves in face of this nationals who are residing abroad for the democratic processes. So yes, we are working on this regards. From the websites, the official websites of the National Electoral Institute, and we have already a campaign so that when we have the phone numbers, we can call you so that they can participate. And because of the mistrust that existed here, there are many locks put into this model. And what we want is that the citizen is really giving us the information so that they can be brought out of the nominal voters roster here in Mexico so that it can be included in the international roster that we have for Mexican residing abroad. And so maybe through the emails, we can have this communication. We have a permanent communication. We have a group that is devoted to attend the vote of people residing abroad precisely to resolve problems. We are uh, thinking about opening voting the number of days. Uh, because of the difference of schedules, we could not do it in a single day. But what we cannot do is the issuing of a vote that only takes one place. We are opening the path to open the number of days in this modality. But and though this possibility of changing voting at certain point in time, and the last decision that is made is the only one that is going to be taken as the vote, the authentic vote. Well, in this situation in Mexico right now, we do not have that. We sent the code to the voters abroad, and they will have half an hour to define who to vote for. We will have 15 states with government elections, governors elections, 9 of which allow the possibility of electing for governors from abroad. And we are generating the same conditions for electronic voting possibilities. And of course, we are being very careful in terms of the regulations and guidelines that each one of the states will have to follow. And in Mexico City, this is going to be also a very interesting situation because we have a migrant election voter, that is to say. So what we want to do is to generate the best of conditions so that all our connationals have this possibility of voting. We will be sending the information stage by stage. At the moment, we are integrating the roster of voters residing in abroad, and there is a special campaign so that you can be included and have the possibility of voting. Participation, and I think that this is a pending issue, and I'm pretty sure that Councillor Bernardo will not allow me to lie here. This is a complaint abroad because they say that parties and authorities only remember them abroad when there is an election. But no, what we want is to have a permanent communication, and it's become quite complex for many reasons because COVID has also had an impact in this regard. Bernardo will support me most probably, and that this event is precisely a commitment that we are generating in order to have greater possibility for continuous interaction for those of you who evidently have to exercise your right to vote abroad. Thank you very much, Councillor. Depending on what Caroline states, I think that we don't have much more time. We are really behind our schedule, so I think that we have to conclude our participation. We would like to thank you all for attending this session. I would like to particularly thank our four panelists today, Ms. Claudia Zavala, Ms. Rita Bel Lopez, Mr. Arturo Meraz, and Mr. Bernardo Valle, counselors, all of them, for their very, very interesting and profound presentations that you gave today. So thank you very much to all. And I would like to remind you that the forum will continue for more days yet. Caroline, would you like to use to take the floor so that you can announce tomorrow's event, please?
Thank you very much, Carlos. Oh, sorry, and thank you very much to
Muchas
all of our
gracias a
panelists
todos
for this very interesting panel.
por este
Thank you
panel tan
to all of you
interesante. Muchas
for
gracias a
posing
todos.
these
Muchas gracias a todos por
questions. And I'm sorry we didn't have time for more. Unfortunately, we do have to close our session at this point. But we have another interesting forum day tomorrow for which you are all cordially invited. We will start tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, so morning our time here in Europe, so that is Central European Standard, Central European Summer Time, sorry. We will look at national online collection, online signature collection systems in comparison, looking at best practices for digital democracy. Afterwards, we will continue with a panel on democracy cities and what communities and municipalities can do to really promote direct democracy and citizen participation. And in the evening, this will be at 6:30 Central European Summer Time. We will look at the northern neighbors of Mexico. We will look at the situation in the United States, especially with regards to the upcoming presidential election, and of course, the many ballot initiatives that will be voted on at the same time, and what the implications of the COVID-19 crisis for that will be. So you are very much invited to join those sessions. We also have another session facilitated by some of our friends who are here tonight. that will look at the role of civil society in Mexico with special regards to overcoming economic disadvantages and corruption. So please do sign into that. That will be at the same time as this session was on Friday. So thank you very much for joining all of us, and we hope to see you tomorrow or in one of the next days. Have a nice afternoon, have a nice evening, have a nice morning, depending on from where you joined us.
Muchísimas gracias. Buena tarde. Hasta luego.